I remember the exact temperature that night because my bones felt colder than the air itself. 23 degrees. Manhattan winters have a way of punishing you, but that night it felt personal. The sidewalk outside the closed hardware store on 8th Avenue had become my usual spot, mostly quiet, partially lit by a flickering street lamp, and far enough from the subway grate that the rising steam didn't choke me while I slept. I sat on a flattened cardboard box, wrapped in an old army jacket that hadn't belonged to me originally, but to a friend I'd lost overseas. I still wore it like a shield, even though it didn't shield me from much anymore. People walked past me quickly, like I was an unpleasant reflection in a mirror they didn't want to look into. You get used to that. At least, I told myself I had. Some nights I believed it, other nights I didn't. That night, I didn't. I pulled my legs closer, trying to conserve whatever warmth I could. My sign, the one I'd rewritten so many times that the cardboard around the letters had worn thin, leaned against my knee. It said, "Army veteran, hungry, anything helps." I hated that sign, hated what it said, hated that it was true. Sometimes, when I felt my mind drifting back into memories I didn't want to revisit, I forced myself to focus on the sounds around me, taxis honking, the rumble of buses, the distant shouts from bars across the avenue. It was noise, but noise was better than silence. Silence made room for the past to creep in. Around 11:30 that night, the regular traffic on 8th Avenue suddenly slowed down. Something was happening. I could tell by how people's eyes widened, how pedestrians paused, how a wave of quiet curiosity passed through the street like a breeze. I raised my head just enough to see a line of black SUVs approaching. They moved slowly, precisely, almost too coordinated for anything casual. It wasn't hard to guess who it might be. New York has a certain way of announcing powerful people without announcing them. I didn't think they would stop right in front of me. The first SUV pulled over, then the second, and then the third. For a moment the street felt frozen, suspended, like even the winter wind had stopped to watch. The rear door of the middle SUV opened, and a man stepped out. I recognized him immediately. You couldn't mistake the posture, the silhouette, or the presence. Donald Trump. I didn't panic. Homeless people learn not to panic. But I felt something tighten in my chest, something I hadn't felt in a long time. Awareness. He wasn't supposed to be here. People like him didn't walk sidewalks like mine. Not at this hour, not on this block, not near men who slept on cardboard. He took a few steps forward, surrounded by security who gave me quick, assessing glances. But he wasn't looking at them. He was looking at me. For a few seconds I couldn't breathe. He didn't look disgusted or annoyed, the way some wealthy people do when they see someone like me on the sidewalk. He looked curious, surprised, maybe even concerned. I wasn't sure. I'd forgotten what concern even looked like. "Are you all right, sir?" he asked, stopping a few feet from me. His voice was calmer than I expected, not the loud, energetic voice people always see on TV or rallies. This one was lower, quieter, almost human in a way I didn't expect. I wasn't sure how to answer. I hadn't talked to anyone in hours, days maybe. Time blends when you're on the streets. "I'm fine," I muttered, even though it was a lie and he probably knew it. He glanced at my jacket, at the faded patches and worn fabric. "Army?" I nodded. "Yeah." He took another small step closer, ignoring the subtle tension from his security team. "What's your name?" That question hit me harder than the cold. Most people never asked my name. They just dropped $1, avoided eye contact, or crossed the street. For a second, I almost forgot what it felt like to answer honestly. "My name's Matthew," I said quietly. My voice cracked a little, like it wasn't used to being spoken out loud. He tilted his head, studying me with an expression I couldn't read. How long have you been out here, Matthew? I felt a knot form in my stomach. The truth was complicated. The truth had layers, shame and guilt wrapped in months of silence, but I said the simplest version. A while, I whispered. He didn't push. He didn't judge. He just stood there in the cold Manhattan night, waiting, like my answer mattered. One of his security guards leaned in and whispered something, but Trump raised a hand slightly, signaling for him to wait. It was the smallest gesture, but it was the first time in a long time that someone had paused their world for mine. I didn't know what to do with that. "Do you have somewhere to stay tonight?" Trump asked. "No," I said. "I usually just stay here." He looked down at my cardboard space, at the crumpled backpack beside me, at the worn boots on my feet. He wasn't rushing to give me money or offer charity. He just looked, really looked, and for the first time in months, I felt seen. "You served our country," he said softly. "You shouldn't be out here." I swallowed hard. My throat burned from the cold or from emotion. I didn't know which. Part of me wanted to tell him everything. Another part wanted to tell him nothing. When you survive the streets, you learn that vulnerability is a luxury. "Things happen," I said, trying to brush it off, but he didn't let it go. "Matthew, what happened to you?" The question triggered something inside me, a pressure behind my ribs, a tremor in my chest. I wasn't ready to answer. I wasn't ready to remember. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. Instead, I looked away, staring at the sidewalk, focusing on a small crack in the concrete like it could hold me together. He didn't walk away. He didn't sigh or shake his head. He just stood there in silence, giving me space to breathe. It was strange, uncomfortable, unfamiliar, but for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel invisible. And I knew, even if I didn't understand how or why, that this moment was going to change something. Maybe everything. For a moment I thought he would get back into the SUV, disappear into the night, and this would just become another strange memory I'd quietly carry. But he didn't move. He folded his arms, not in impatience, but like a man who had decided he wasn't going anywhere until he got a real answer. I could feel the stares from people passing by. Some had stopped across the street, pretending not to look while filming with their phones. Others just slowed down, trying to piece together what they were seeing: a homeless veteran sitting on a cold sidewalk, talking to Donald Trump in the middle of the night. If I'd seen it from far away, I probably wouldn't have believed it either. "I'm not trying to pry," he said, his voice steady, "but I want to understand. How does someone go from serving this country to this?" I let out a humorless laugh. "You don't go from one to the other overnight," I said. "It's more like a slow fall. And one day, you stop realizing how far you've dropped." He didn't look offended. He didn't look amused either. He just listened. And because he was listening, really listening, the words inside me started to move, like ice slowly cracking after holding too much pressure. "I was in the army," I said. "Infantry. We got sent overseas. It was rough." The images flashed in my mind: sandstorms, heat, darkness, the weight of gear on my shoulders, the sound of bullets that you never forget once you've heard them. I swallowed, my throat tightening. My breath became visible in the cold air. "I had a best friend there," I continued, "Ryan. We were in the same unit. He was the kind of guy who could make a joke right after almost dying. You know the type." I paused, my eyes unfocused, seeing a place far from the Manhattan sidewalk. "We had this stupid promise," I said, a small ghost of a smile touching my lips. "If one of us didn't make it back, the other would find their family and look after them, tell them how they really were, not just the folded flag and official speech." Trump shifted his weight slightly, his expression softening. "Did he make it back?" he asked. I didn't answer right away. I didn't need to. The silence between us gave him the truth before the words did. "One night we got caught in an ambush," I said finally. "Everything was chaos. You don't think in straight lines in those moments. You act, you react, you try to stay alive. Ryan, he was hit. I was right there, close enough to reach him, close enough to see the surprise in his eyes when he realized it. The air around me felt colder. My fingers, numb inside my torn gloves, curled into fists. "I tried to get to him," I whispered. But I hesitated, just for a second. I ducked behind cover before going back for him. That 1 second, that one tiny moment where I put my own survival first. My voice broke. By the time I reached him, it was too late. I could feel my heartbeat pounding against my chest like it wanted to get out. "Logically, everyone told me it wasn't my fault," I said, "that it was the chaos of war, that I did what anyone else would have done. But there's a difference between what people say and what you know about yourself in the quiet hours." Trump was standing very still now, the New York noise fading behind him. His security guys were watching, but none of them interrupted. The city had become a blurry background. It was just me and him in that moment. "When I got back home," I continued, "I tried to do what we promised. I went to see Ryan's family, his parents, his little sister. I brought them his things. I told them how brave he was, how he always put others first. I gave them the version of him they deserved." I took a shaky breath. But I didn't tell them the part that haunted me, the part where I hesitated, the part where I wondered every single day if he'd still be alive if I'd moved 1 second faster. My voice grew quiet. And after that, I just couldn't go back to normal life. The job I'd lined up didn't feel right. The apartment I rented didn't feel like a home. I couldn't sleep. When I did, it was worse. Trump nodded slowly. "So you left everything," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yeah," I said. "Bit by bit. First I lost the job. Then I stopped calling people back. My family tried for a while, but you can only watch someone self-destruct so many times before you run out of ways to stop it. Eventually, I ended up here, on sidewalks like this, feeling like I didn't deserve anything better." He looked at me with an expression I didn't expect. Not pity, not annoyance, but something that looked like recognition. Like he'd met this kind of brokenness before in a different costume. "How long?" he asked. "How long have you been out here like this?" 3 years, give or take," I said. I stopped counting exactly. Some days are just days. "And no help from the VA?" he asked, frowning. "I tried at first," I said. "But when you already feel like you don't deserve help, it's easy to sabotage it. Miss appointments, lie on forms, tell them you're fine when you're not. Eventually, the system believes you, and you're left with what you've chosen, or what you think you deserve." He pressed his lips together, looking away briefly, then back at me. "You do deserve help," he said quietly. I shrugged. "It's not about what I deserve. It's about what I can live with. Some people carry their wounds on the outside. Mine found a way to live in my decisions." We fell silent for a few seconds. The cold wind cut through us, but neither of us moved. I watched his breath condense in the air, watched the way his eyes shifted as he thought. Something about his posture reminded me of the officers I'd served under. The ones who, once in a while, showed they were still human underneath all the rank and responsibility. "Can I ask you something?" I said suddenly. He nodded. "Go ahead." "Why did you stop?" I asked. "You could have driven by, pretended not to see me. Most people do. You're you. You have a million things to do, places to be. Why this sidewalk? Why me?" He paused, and for a moment I thought he might deflect with some generic answer. But he didn't. "I've driven past men like you many times," he said. Too many times. Sometimes I noticed. Sometimes I didn't. People in my position, we move fast. There's always another meeting, another call, another crisis. But lately, he inhaled slowly. Lately, I've been thinking more about the people this country has left behind. You start realizing there are numbers in reports, and then there are faces. Real people. I saw you, and I couldn't just keep going. He hesitated, and his voice lowered almost to a murmur. My brother struggled with issues of his own years ago. Different situation. But watching someone battle themselves, it changes you. I blinked. I'd heard vague things about his family and passing, but I'd never connected them to anything like this. It felt strange, hearing someone like him talk about someone close to him falling apart. So I stopped, he finished, because I didn't want you to just be another man I never asked about. Something shifted inside me. It wasn't forgiveness or sudden trust. Those things don't appear out of nowhere. It was more like a tiny fracture in the wall I'd built around myself. A small crack where light could enter. I looked at him for a long moment, trying to understand if this was real or just a strange dream cooked up by exhaustion and cold. But his breath was real. His wrinkles were real. The details in his coat, the way his hair moved in the wind, the faint tiredness in his eyes, all real. Matthew, he said again, and there was a weight in the way he said my name. What do you want? If you could change one thing right now, what would it be? That question caught me off guard. People rarely ask a homeless man what he wants beyond a sandwich or $1. The world assumes your dreams shrink when your life does. But inside, the big ones never really disappear. They just go quiet. What did I want? My first thought was simple. I wanted warmth, a bed, a shower. A chance to sleep without worrying someone might steal my boots. But underneath all that, deeper than the cold, there was another answer. I want to stop feeling like my life ended over there, I said slowly. I want to stop replaying that night with Ryan every time I close my eyes. I want to feel like I'm allowed to be alive when he's not. My voice wavered. I hadn't said that out loud to anyone. Not to doctors, not to caseworkers. Not even to the other guys on the street when we'd share cigarettes and stories just to pass the time. Trump stared at me in silence for a few seconds, and I saw something like conflict cross his face. The tension between what he could do as a man and what people expected him to do as a symbol. You are allowed to be alive, he said firmly. You served. You lost a friend. You came home with scars people can't see. That doesn't mean your story ends on this sidewalk. This can't be the last chapter. His words reminded me of something one of my old sergeants used to say. As long as you're breathing, you're still in the fight. Back then, it was about staying alive in a war zone. Now, it sounded like it meant something else, as if the battlefield had shifted from deserts and streets overseas to the inside of my own head. I swallowed, my eyes burning, and looked away so he wouldn't see the tears forming. You talk like it's that easy, I whispered. It's not easy, he replied, but it is possible. That's the difference. I let that sink in. Possible, not promised, not guaranteed, just possible. Maybe that was enough to start with. From the corner of my eye, I saw more people gathering now, pretending not to listen while listening to every word. Some had their phones out, others were whispering names, recognizing him, trying to make sense of the scene. I suddenly felt exposed. Like this wasn't my story anymore, like it was being pulled into some spectacle I had no control over. I don't want this to be a show, I muttered under my breath. He heard me. It's not, he said. Then he turned to his security team and gestured subtly. They moved back, creating a little space, forming a loose barrier that kept the crowd at a distance. The cameras couldn't get as close now. The circle narrowed again until it felt more like a conversation and less like a performance. "Better?" he asked. "Yeah," I said quietly. "Thank you." For a moment I realized something simple but powerful. Even on the street, even with nothing in my pockets, my comfort still mattered. My voice still mattered. Someone had just rearranged their world, even slightly, to protect my dignity in front of strangers. It was a small thing, but small things add up. If someone's listening to this right now, if you're watching and thinking you don't matter, I need you to hear this part. The moment someone treats you like you still have a say in your own story, something inside you remembers that you're still here, still alive, still capable of more than just surviving. Trump took a step closer again, anchoring the conversation back to us. "Matthew," he said, "there's something I need to hear from you. No filters, no softening it. If you had the chance to speak to someone in my position, not just me, but anyone with power, money, influence, what would you say?" The question hung in the air, heavy and electric. I felt my heartbeat speed up. My palms were sweating despite the cold. I'd never been asked that before, not really, not in a way that made me believe the answer might actually matter. My mind raced. Years of frustration, disappointment, betrayal, and loneliness surged to the surface. I thought about the speeches I'd seen on TV, the promises made in front of cameras, the patriotic music, the flags. I thought about the nights in shelters, the endless forms, the waiting lists, the polite nods from people who went home to warm houses after handing me a brochure. The words started forming in my chest long before they reached my mouth. I looked up at him, straight into his eyes. For the first time that night, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel like a problem to be fixed or a statistic on a report. I felt like a man who for just one moment had the chance to speak for more than just himself. My lips parted as I prepared to say the 5 words that had been building inside me for years. And right there, in the freezing air of a Manhattan winter, with the world watching from the edges, I finally began to let them out. The words gathered in my throat like a storm trying to break. For years, they had lived inside me, heavy, unspoken, shaping the way I walked, the way I breathed, the way I existed in the shadows of this city. And now, a man who represented power, influence, and national identity stood in front of me asking for honesty. I knew I couldn't hold it anymore. I lifted my head slowly, the cold burning my face, my breath visible between us like a fragile bridge connecting 2 very different lives. I could feel the tremor in my hands, the tightness in my stomach, the weight of everything I'd carried for far too long. And then I said it. 5 words. Words that didn't come out in anger, but in truth, raw, unfiltered, unadorned. "You forgot about us." The moment the sentence left my lips, everything around us stopped. The crowd noise faded. The traffic hum disappeared. Even the wind felt suspended in midair, holding its breath along with everyone else. Trump froze. Not the dramatic kind of freeze you see in headlines or staged photo ops. This was different, real. His eyes widened just a little, his posture stiffened, and for the first time since he stepped out of the SUV, he had no immediate words, no quick response, no practiced expression, just silence. And in that silence something shifted between us. His jaw tightened slightly, not in offense, but in impact, like he had just been hit by a truth he hadn't prepared for. I looked down after saying it, almost regretting it, afraid I had crossed some invisible line. But then I remembered where I was sitting, on cardboard, on concrete, on the edge of a life I once believed would be different. I didn't have much left to lose. So I looked up again. His gaze had changed. It wasn't the gaze of a politician or a businessman or a celebrity. It was the gaze of a man confronted with something painful, something unsettling. Something real. What do you mean by that? He finally asked, his voice lower than before. I swallowed. All of us, veterans, the ones who come back different, the ones who don't come back whole, the ones who fall through every crack because no one knows what to do with a soldier who carries everything inside instead of on their uniform. He didn't interrupt. He didn't defend himself. He didn't remind me of programs or speeches or policies. He just listened, and that alone told me he understood the weight of what I had said. You forgot about us, I repeated quietly. Not just you, everyone. America, the country we fought for. They remember us on holidays, or when we're in dress blues saluting a flag, but when we come home broken, when we're invisible, when we lose ourselves, nobody knows what to do. It's easier to pretend we're fine. My voice cracked. I tried to steady it, but the emotion pushed through. I walk past flags on storefronts, patriotic posters, people cheering at parades, and none of it feels like it's for people like me anymore. It's all symbolism, not substance. Trump watched me carefully. His eyes softened, not with pity, but with something heavier, something like responsibility. A slow exhale escaped him, as if he'd been holding air in his lungs too long. You're not invisible, he said finally. Not to me. Not tonight. I looked away, blinking against the cold, against the threat of tears. Tonight, I repeated softly. But tomorrow I'll still be here, on this sidewalk. And you'll be back in a warm house with 100 things to do. Life goes on. It always does. That doesn't mean I didn't hear you, he said firmly. One of his security guards shifted uncomfortably, but Trump didn't break eye contact with me. I could see the gears turning inside him, the conflict between what he felt as a man and the expectations that came with his name, his position, his reputation. Those 5 words, he said slowly. They're going to stay with me. I didn't answer. I wasn't looking for a promise. I wasn't looking for a miracle. I just wanted one person, just one, to acknowledge the truth. But then something unexpected happened. Trump stepped closer and lowered himself to where he was almost at my level. Not kneeling, that wasn't his style, but close enough that we were eye to eye, close enough that I could see the lines around his eyes, the exhaustion, the humanity beneath the public armor. You said, I forgot about you, he said, but maybe this country forgot how to see the men it expects to be strong all the time. You didn't fail your friend. You didn't abandon him. War forces impossible choices. You hesitated because you're human, not because you're weak. I could feel the tears building again. I clenched my jaw, trying to swallow them back. I still hear him calling for me, I whispered. Every night. I believe you, he said. But punishing yourself forever doesn't bring him back. It only takes you down with him, and I don't think he would have wanted that. For a moment, it felt like the world shrank down to just the 2 of us. A homeless veteran who had forgotten how to be alive, and a billionaire who carried his own ghosts in a completely different way. He looked around at the street, the people, the cameras now held back by security. You know, people will twist this moment, he said. They'll say it was staged, or political, or strategic. They'll turn it into something it's not. Yeah, I said. They always do. But I want you to hear something from me without any filter, he said. You matter. Not because of what you did for this country, though that's important. You matter because you're still here. You're still fighting, even if you think you're not. The wind whipped by us again, but I barely felt it. The heat of the moment, the emotion, the sudden break in the armor I'd worn for years, it wrapped around me like a second layer. He studied me a little longer, almost as if searching for something. When he spoke next, his voice carried less weight and more curiosity. Matthew, why haven't you looked for help again? Real help, not just shelters. I sighed, long and slow. Because help feels like admitting I failed, like admitting I couldn't hold it together, and deep down I kept thinking I deserved the pain, that living on the streets was my way of paying for what happened to Ryan. Trump exhaled, shaking his head slightly. That's not paying for anything. That's just suffering for the sake of suffering, and you've done that long enough. I didn't know what to say to that. A truth like that doesn't settle immediately. It lingers, hanging off the edges of your mind until you're ready to let it in. Out of nowhere, he asked, "Do you have anything of your friends with you?" I nodded. His jacket. I tugged lightly at the frayed sleeve. This is his. I kept it because it feels like a piece of him stayed with me. He reached out slowly and touched the edge of the sleeve, just for a second. "Then honor him by living," he said, "not dying slowly on these streets." His words pierced deeper than I expected. I turned my face away, overwhelmed, and for a moment I didn't trust myself to speak. Then I admitted something I'd never said aloud. "I'm scared," I whispered. "I'm scared that if I leave this life, if I try to rebuild, I'll fail again, and I don't know if I can survive another failure." Trump didn't rush to answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady. "You survived war," he said. "You survived grief. You survived loneliness. You survived 3 winters on these streets. Don't tell me you can't survive trying again." A shaky breath left my lungs, and I felt something inside me loosen. A knot that had been there for years. He stood up slowly, his joints creaking slightly in the cold. Then he extended a hand toward me. It wasn't a dramatic gesture. It wasn't symbolic or showy. It was quiet, simple, human. "Come with me," he said, "just for tonight. Let's get you somewhere warm, food, a bed, a shower, no cameras, no headlines, just a place to breathe." I stared at his hand, my mind racing. Fear, hope, shame, possibility, all tangled together. "I don't know if I can," I whispered. "Yes," he replied softly. "You can. You just have to let yourself." The crowd watched from afar, but in that moment none of them mattered. It was just me and a choice I hadn't expected to face tonight, to stay where I'd been dying slowly, or to take the first step toward living again. I stared at his hand, feeling the weight of the moment press against my chest. And with my heart trembling inside me, I finally reached forward. When my hand finally touched his, it felt like a jolt of warmth in the middle of winter. His grip was firm, steady, the kind of grip that didn't rush or pull, just held, waiting for me to decide if I was really ready to stand. I pushed myself up from the sidewalk, legs stiff from hours in the cold. My knees wobbled slightly, but I stayed upright. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't rising alone. The crowd murmured as I stood beside him. Some pointed, some whispered, some kept recording. I lowered my eyes, uneasy. Trump noticed immediately. "Don't look at them," he said quietly. "Look ahead." So I did. His security team parted just enough to let us pass. As we started walking toward the SUV, something strange happened. People moved aside, not because of him, but because of us. They looked at me with curiosity, confusion, even sympathy. I wasn't invisible anymore, and the sudden attention felt overwhelming, almost painful. "Keep breathing," Trump said under his breath, noticing the tension in my shoulders. "I'm not used to people watching me," I muttered. "You're not used to people seeing you," he corrected. "Tonight they do." I didn't know how to respond, but his words hit something inside me. Maybe he was right. Maybe I had been hiding so long that I forgot what it felt like to be seen. When we reached the SUV, the driver opened the door. Trump stepped halfway in, then turned to me. "You coming?" he asked. I hesitated. Leaving that sidewalk felt symbolic, like stepping across a line I'd drawn for myself years ago. Part of me still feared I didn't belong anywhere beyond it. But his gaze held steady. Not judgmental, not impatient, just steady. I took a breath and climbed inside. The warmth hit me immediately. My body shook involuntarily as heat began seeping into my frozen fingers. A blanket was handed to me, and I wrapped it around myself with an almost childlike relief. Trump sat across from me, watching quietly as the SUV pulled into traffic. For a while we rode in silence. It wasn't awkward. It was the kind of silence that fills the space after a door has finally reopened after years of being stuck shut. After a few minutes he spoke. "You know, I meant what I said back there. Those 5 words matter. They're not just a criticism. They're a warning and a truth, and I needed to hear them." I kept my eyes lowered. "I wasn't trying to attack you." "I know," he said. "That's why it hit harder." I shifted in my seat. "I didn't think you'd take it seriously." He let out a short breath. "Most people think I don't listen, but I do, especially when someone tells me something no one else has the courage to say." I wasn't sure what to say to that, so I asked the question that had been bothering me since we stepped into the SUV. "Where are we going?" "To a place I trust," he said simply. "A veterans outreach center I've worked with before. No press, no officials, just good people." My chest tightened. "I don't want any cameras. I don't want this turned into a story." "It won't be," he said. "Not unless you want it to be." He wasn't lying. I could tell from his tone, steady, direct, almost protective. He understood the risk. One picture, one headline, and this could be twisted into something completely different. The SUV turned onto quieter streets, away from the chaos of Midtown. I watched the city pass by in flashes. Neon signs, late-night diners, people laughing behind foggy windows. Worlds I used to belong to, worlds I'd convinced myself I couldn't re-enter. "Matthew," he said after a moment, "tell me something honestly. When you think about leaving the street, what scares you the most?" I stared at my hands wrapped in the blanket. "That I won't know who I am off the sidewalk," I whispered. "Out here, the world expects nothing from me. I can't disappoint anyone if I'm already at the bottom." He nodded, as if he understood that more than he expected. "And what would happen," he asked, "if you stopped defining yourself by the worst moment of your life?" I swallowed. "I don't know who I'd be." "That's the beautiful part," he said. "You get to decide." The SUV slowed as we approached a modest brick building with a small sign. Veterans Hope Center. Warm yellow lights glowed from inside. It didn't look like an institution or a facility. It looked like a place where someone might finally stop running from themselves. Before we got out, Trump spoke again. "You take the next step," he said. "Not because of me, not because of guilt, not because you think you owe anyone anything. You take it because you're still alive, and that means you still have choices." I stared at the building, my heart pounding. The idea of stepping inside felt terrifying. But staying in the SUV, staying in that old version of myself, felt worse. A counselor greeted us at the entrance, a woman with gentle eyes and a firmness in her posture that told me she'd worked with many men like me. Trump whispered something to her, something I couldn't hear, and she nodded with a seriousness that made my stomach twist. Not with fear, with hope. Inside, they gave me food. Real food. Hot soup, a toasted sandwich, coffee that didn't taste like burnt water. I ate slowly, afraid it might disappear if I rushed. Trump stayed nearby but didn't hover. He let me eat in peace. A group of volunteers brought fresh clothes, clean socks, and a private room with a bed. A real bed. I ran my hand across the sheets, the mattress pressing back gently under my fingers. I felt a lump in my throat. "I can't remember the last time I slept on something that didn't touch concrete," I whispered. "You will tonight," Trump said. I turned to him. "Why are you doing this, really?" He paused, then shrugged slightly. "Because you reminded me of something important. No man should be forgotten. Not in this country. Especially not someone who served it." He stepped closer, his voice lowering. "And because you gave me a truth no one else has said to my face." I didn't know how to respond. Emotion tightened my chest. For the first time in years, the possibility of healing didn't feel like a distant fantasy. It felt reachable. "I don't know how to thank you," I said softly. "You don't need to," he said. "Just get better. That's enough." We stood there in a meaningful silence for a few moments, the kind of silence that closes one chapter and opens another. Before he left, he placed a hand on my shoulder. "Matthew, don't disappear again. The world needs people who can tell the truth the way you did tonight." My breath shook, but I nodded. "I won't." "Good," he said. "Then this was worth it." He stepped back. "And remember, help isn't weakness, it's strategy." A faint, unexpected smile tugged at my mouth. "That sounds like something a general would say." He smiled back. "Or a businessman." We both laughed quietly. He walked toward the door, and as the cold night air blew in from outside, he looked over his shoulder one last time. "You matter, Matthew. Don't forget that." Then he walked out into the darkness. I stood there, unsure if I should breathe, cry, or laugh. Instead, I did something simple. I stepped back into the room they'd given me. I closed the door. I sat on the bed and let the weight of the night settle. For the first time in years, I slept without nightmares. And when I woke the next morning, something inside me had shifted, not magically, not completely, but enough to take one more step, and then another, and then another. Recovery wasn't instant. Healing wasn't easy. But both were finally possible. If you're listening to my story right now, if you're watching this on your screen and wondering whether your life can change, I want you to hear this part clearly. Your story isn't over. Not if you're still breathing. Not if you're still willing to take one step in the right direction. And if this story touched you in any way, I want you to tell me in the comments. Tell me where you are in your journey. Tell me what you're fighting for. You'd be surprised how many people you might help by sharing your truth. And don't forget to like and subscribe, not just for this story, but so you don't miss the next one. You never know which story might be the one that shifts something inside you. Because sometimes all it takes is 5 words to change everything. This is a fictional story created for entertainment. Any resemblance to real events, public figures, or actual persons is purely narrative and not intended to represent real occurrences. We respect YouTube's policies and all individuals portrayed in this fictional narrative.